Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live episode of To the Moon, Allison, where we talk about the top and trending works in science fiction, fantasy, speculative fiction, and romance. And I'm your host, author Allison Martine Hubbard, author of works of contemporary romance and speculative fiction. And I'm so excited to be joined today by the brilliant mind of Essa Hansen, who isn't even wearing her glasses. Like, I was expecting nerd camaraderie here, but that's fine. Apparently, she doesn't actually need them.
I need that memo, yeah.
That's okay. I usually am the one wearing them because I've got to read the comments and stuff, and otherwise you are just a blur. I mean, I was cleaning my glasses earlier and going, I don't know what's happening.
Which guest do I have here?
I know, like, then we're going, we don't even know what's happening. And she is here to talk about her amazing science fiction. I don't know if space opera is the right word, but space opera,
Science
the Graven
fantasy,
Trilogy.
maybe? Yeah.
And Essa, welcome to the show. And I'm going to try to hold all your books.
Try and...
Well, you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself while I do this.
Very nice. Yeah, I write sci-fi fantasy. Just finished the Graven Trilogy. Writer by night, and by day I'm a sound designer on science fiction and fantasy feature films like Marvel and Disney and Pixar and all those fun things.
If you look up Essa's IMDb page, she's probably worked on everything you've loved recently, and it kind of blows my mind. And I want to know, have you gotten to touch Taika Waititi? Is that like a thing? Do you get to touch him?
No. So a lot of our final mixes happen in LA, and often I've stayed up here in San Francisco Bay Area. So I'm like remotely connected to the stage and all the going goes on there, but I don't get to rub elbows with the celebrity.
I mean, I wasn't asking if you like licked a Hemsworth. I just wanted to know if you like touched Taika Waititi, but that's fine. That's fine. And I figured with the post-production, like my first intro into what movies were, I don't know if I can get this right, my godfather's sister, not actually related, she did post work years and years ago. And like, that's how I met Buffy the Vampire Slayer, because she did it on the movie. And I'm like, that movie, that looks ridiculous. She's like, just watch it. And then I was hooked. And then I made my friends watch it. And this was before the show came on. So nobody had any idea what I was talking about. And I'm running around going, Pike isn't a name, it's a fish. And they're just like, you can't like cult classics before the cult classics, Allison, get out. But so you do the sound stuff. And then here you're doing things that are so visual. Did you have a guide to help? Because I wanted someone to draw this for me. Where is the animated version of this?
Maybe someday.
I want it.
Cool. Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about it? About the trilogy? Because like, it's space opera, but it's multiverse. It's set in a distant place and time and has so much going on that if I try to sum it up, I will butcher it. So I'm going to let you butcher it instead. I'm going to butcher the names later. So you go for it.
Yeah. So it's set in a very vast bubble multiverse. So the universes are spherical shaped and kind of stuck together like a foam. They can be all different sizes. Like you can have tiny universes, you can have universes that span galaxies, and in each one are unique physical laws. And the membranes of them are permeable, so some things can pass through, but you're subject to the translation of
it may not be good.
It may not be good. You may not be compatible with where you're trying to go to, or it may be better, maybe more ideal. So there's sort of this exploration drive in this economy that's based on the translation between all these different worlds. And because it spans many, many galaxies, there's many species, and it's sort of doesn't dive into individual alien cultures, but it's more of a top level, like the interaction and accommodation of all of these different cultures and peoples kind of coming together.
Well, and you have characters from all these different places. And it's funny because like we meet some of the core crew that introduces our main character, who he changes his name. So it's Caden, but sometimes he goes by Win. And Caden meets these different people, and we get different people and their different cultures and all this stuff. And I'm like, this is where I want my visual guide, or I want to draw it out. But I'm so not artistically, like, I almost thought sometimes I kind of dress up for shows. I thought, what if I put chromatophores on my face? And then I go, I would just think I had some really bad skin condition. So I'm not going to do that because I am not a special effects makeup artist. But you have these different people. So they're not just all a bunch of humans or even human-ish. You've got all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, all sorts of aliens. And it was even hard for me. So like I gather a gallery of like reference images and stuff to kind of, I'll have my writing on one side of the screen, and then I'll have like some images that fit the mood of this, like for me to zone off onto, right?
Yeah.
When my brain's a little bit stuck, I have like imagery there. But it was really hard for the alien characters, like to find, you're not going to find one piece of artwork or like one reference actor or model or face or whatever
Mm-mm.
that fits. So it's like a collection of like little bits, like this part and then this part and this part.
You end up looking like you're doing a serial killer ransom letter, but with
Yeah,
faces, and you're like cutting things
exactly.
out. You're like,
Yeah.
but this person's diaphanous, so it's a little different. And I need to do this one in clay. Can I do this one in clay? Make them 3D. I actually, my son did 3D of a party goer, and this is air clay. Things in my desk. We don't ask. But yeah, you have all these different cultures coming together and navigated through the eyes of a guy who kind of hasn't been exposed to most
Yeah.
of it. Yeah. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about how you start with this idea of Caden and how he would be kind of our point of view for your series here.
Yeah. So it's such a big world. I started, and this trilogy as a whole starts pretty isolated, pretty small. So we're following um, at the beginning a young boy that's on a planet that's like completely enveloped in vapor, so he doesn't even know that space exists, doesn't never sees the night sky, never, like, it's very, very isolated, very impoverished worldview.
But there are
um
cows.
there are cows. It's like
There
a,
are cows.
agrarian production planet, kind of dystopian. um and then the plot swiftly escalates, and he's sort of thrown into the realization of exactly how vast this world is, and like what a kind of insignificant and um like gear in a bigger machine role he was bred and for,
Yeah,
like
it's like,
just born into
oh,
and shoved into this little role.
here, you're
um
in this family now. Like even the way the
yeah.
family dynamics work were fascinating because it's not a mom and a dad or two parents or seven parents come together. It's like, here, we're assigning you this child. Have one. It's like, oh,
Yeah, can we keep him? Let's keep
sure.
this stray. Yeah, so he falls into a found family crew, kind of like Firefly, Guardians of the Galaxy, like Mass Effect. We all love like the
Yes.
space faring crew of misfits, and they know everything. They've been around. They're explorers. So, um, and the reader gets drawn along with Caden, and I have a very convenient way to explain all the world building and like kind of gradually open up what the multiverse is and how it works and all the sort of metaphysical laws and physical transformation stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
All
not
of
going to
them.
say you need a physics degree to follow any of this. You're doing it really well, but I do feel like if I had left physics less in high school instead of going off to mock trial and swimming, I might have had an easier time just getting like, so okay, universe is around, and the people are there, and then they're covering, and then okay, I think I might be following this. It's good, but there's no math involved, so I'm fine.
Yeah, there's no math, and it's not like I try not to dig in too technically to a lot of
No,
it, and
no.
just
And
like
well,
focus
because
on the
when you
characters.
finally, yeah, like when you finally do get to some of this stuff, and that happens more in some of the later books, it's way more metaphysical, like the ideas of
Yeah,
energies and stuff, which fortunately zero math involved. So you can follow the ideas and then there's presences behind them as opposed to like, okay, you got to sit down and figure out how exactly this is going to work. It's like all that really matters
yeah.
is
Well, I
when
had
your
to do
universe,
that. So
you had to do that, but the reader doesn't. You do the heavy lifting, for which I truly appreciate.
yeah. So the first book and the story, like from the beginning, starts small and kind of expands. And the first book, I feel like, sort of contained, and then as they go on, it just gets bigger and bigger, and
And so
multiple
do the
dimensions
books. I
added.
mean, this is not a
Yeah,
small book, but they don't get
really.
smaller. Yep,
I
yep.
think
Well, I have my notes up.
did pretty
Oh, yeah.
good. They expand at the same rate, which I was like, I think that seems logically
It's a good
good scope.
progression. It's a good
Yeah.
progression scale, but both also even from points of view. So like the first book, it's
Hmm.
pretty much all from one point of
It's
view.
one,
And then the second we go
two.
into two. And by the last one, like we're in four. And I'm like, okay, I know who we're with and I know where we're going. And it all makes sense because it's not like
Yeah,
you just start throwing people at us. By the time we get to those other characters, we're
yeah,
invested with who they are and not
yeah,
necessarily always show or how we feel about them or who we should be rooting for. And that probably changes for readers
yeah.
as they go on. They're like, wait a second.
Although by book four,
Hmm.
I was like, why did I think it was a good idea to exponentially grow the number of points of views
Fortunately,
and
you
complexity?
stopped at book 3, so you weren't at
Yeah,
like 16.
eight.
And then
Yeah,
that's the
eight,
book. You're like,
16. That would have been a bit
that would
much.
have been a bit too much. I don't think anybody would have followed it, and I would hate for you to have had to try to figure out how to get six. I mean, you have more than 16 characters because by the time some of them you've even already numbered, so that helps. Like you can just okay, you're number
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, so the second book introduces a new character, and she has her own found family kind of around her. So it's like these two found families that kind of come together, and then that's the thrust toward the third book, and it sort of gets more metaphysical, broader in scope, multiple dimensions. The stakes go from personal to
Huge.
multiversal.
Universe, multiverse, time and space, quite literally.
Yeah.
Like when I read the coda, I'm like, oh, I see. I won't spoil it, but it's like, oh,
Yes.
I see where we're going here. But the idea is, as you said, they keep getting bigger and bigger. But because it does so gradually, we never feel like we're losing track of how we got here. You just put us through a lot of pain on behalf of characters to get there.
Yeah.
So Essa, who hurt you and made you want to take it out on all of these people? Like I won't say who, because I'm sure this person doesn't want to be outed, but they had to have me confirm that a certain character who was imperiled earlier was all right, because they were too traumatized to keep reading. I'm like, they're fine, keep reading, it's okay. Are you sure? I'm promising it's fine, just keep going. Because you do a lot of like dangle them into death, pull them out again.
I hurt them a lot, but I don't think I kill as many characters as other authors do.
I agree.
All in all.
And
background, yes.
People are in stasis. Well, yeah, I mean, hey, entire universes, sorry, yours got subsumed and everybody in it. I mean, the opening chapter in ETHERA GRAVE is one of the most beautiful and heartbreaking things I've ever read. And I'm just like, I mean, I understood why the characters were making the decisions they did, but they still hurt to read through it. And you hurt with them.
Yeah. And like, I struggled with like where to start, kind of a place to recap the like 2 whole books of context. And again, it was starting kind of small and intimate and character focused in like a situation that very succinctly sums up like this, what's at stake, what's being asked of the character, like how it came here, and like what's next in one.
and the different themes that you explore as you go along, they kind of stay the same but broaden as they go. So we still always have these issues of found family and your place in the universe, issues of choice and personal autonomy, even issues of things like the greater good and what does that really mean, and back on an individual scale. And you explore that so beautifully through so many ideas, even stuff as simple as, we're being told, and here's another name I can't pronounce. If this is somebody you know, it's a Greek name. I would say Ioannis Mavroukakis, but I'm probably butchering that. So if you want to write it in the comments phonetically, I'll try again. But it's like, damn, it's gonna be really hard to avoid spoilers. I'm trying. It's just hard. I mean, I could we could just talk about halfway through second book. Yeah, I won't say anything about what happens in the third book and any of that. Was I close? So well done. I tried. My Greek is pretty much non-existent, other than ordering certain things off menus, and even then, it's probably bad. But you have these themes that keep getting explored through different characters and through different situations, and the stakes just keep growing. And sometimes in ways where it's like, oh, I see how this decision earlier impacts this decision later, and the echoes of that, and characters still wrestling with choices they made earlier and wanting to undo the choices. But some of this stuff is inherently personal. Like one of the things, and I saw your book had been shelved under things like neurodiversity, that you have kind of a representation of neurodiverse characters, and you have people who are across a different gender and the spectrum as far as sexuality and gender presentation, with characters who I would describe as non-binary and others who are more like gender fluid. I mean, you literally, I was thinking here, like, and again, a name I'm probably gonna butcher. If you could sit down with Sarah Halley Finn and say, we're casting my book now, it would be so much easier to do this if we had everybody in mocap, because like half the characters aren't fully human. And so it's like, yeah, I'm sorry, we don't have anybody who's of the Endelvian race today available.
Yeah, the crew is like 2 kind of normal characters, and then 2 completely aliens you need mocap or heavy makeup, and then one like it's a shapeshifter, so absolutely need
today you're this.
Yeah,
Sean Gunn would be busy just there on all fours. Andy Serkis is like, you don't have, I only know 2 guys who do the mocap. You'd need like a whole crew of them. That would be a lot to get them all done. But you do this in a way that it's just beautiful, how the characters, that becomes part of who they are, and it's not just like, oh, it's a gimmick that and Endarian, and I probably butchered Endarian too, but they go back and forth between being a female character and a male character, and both of them are this character, and it's like, is that gender fluid? Well, it's not even gender fluid, because they're literally changing who they are. And I'm like, oh, I know some different actors who could probably do that, but none of them look like who you described. And also then you'd need the entire Jim Henson Studios to create all of your animals. First off, I've never seen somebody take an animal, a creature, and make me absolutely terrified of it, and then later make me want to know where I can adopt one. So I mean, like, and one of the things I will say, like, at first when I was reading it, I was taking a few notes in the first book, and I'm like, I want a Whipkin. Whipkins are cute. I mean, no one got me a Billy Bumbler from Stephen King's. Like, there's a whole list of animals that don't exist that I think I should have, and like, oh, I want a Whipkin, and it's just like crawling all over people, and I'm picturing kind of like a softer ferret or something, but then it has like membranes on its feet. I'm going, I still want one. But later, okay, and well, we can't clone Andy Serkis. You can only clone Emperor Palpatine. Everybody knows that. Okay. Besides, Andy Serkis now shows his face doing stuff. Like after Andor, we expect to actually get to see him. He can't just run around being Gollum all the time. So I don't know where you got the inspiration for all these creatures and the fact that their biology matters and the biology matters in terms of the universe. So I think one of the big things that I tip my hat, and for anybody who's reading it going, I've never read something like this before, where the physics matters to the characters because they can't all survive in the different physics. So it's not just like, oh, okay, well, you might destroy a universe. Well, you can't survive in this other universe when the multiverses might be passing through each other. And the idea of like, okay, every time I hear rind, I think of like the rind on a really fancy cheese. So I don't know what you were going for, but that's mostly what I was visualizing as two cheeses were coming together and overlapping. And what it does, and certain creatures not being able to survive, or they might actually thrive in a different one. Where did that idea come from? Like, I've never encountered anything like that, other than the idea of like, well, a bird doesn't do really well underwater. And I'm thinking of like Scuttle talking underwater in the recent Little Mermaid. Everybody has a problem with that, by the way. We're just like, birds can't talk underwater, other than birds can't talk. We're all problematic with it. Can't talk underwater.
Right, underwater. Yeah, so way back, like where a lot of my ideas come from is like taking physical things in nature, or things I observe, and playing with scale, or playing with like just kind of abstracting that thing from its context and looking at it in more detail. So like if you take a foam structure, like a very, very fine, like, bubble structure. Yeah, but what if that was the scale of galaxies? Like, that's kind of interesting. This energetic lattice kind of, like your lovely background.
Yes, this is my presentation, and some of these are made of.
Yeah. So like I would see that, and then maybe my brain would go like, what if that was cosmic scale? Like, what if that was, the structure of the universe? And then what if each of those little like rooms basically was different in some way? What if you could pass in? And then it sort of snowballs from there to like, that's a very interesting like idea of how economy would work. Like some things are more, you can transform things, make them more valuable, move them over here, like the whole kind of trade situation of
and how you did that with the NOPHEK themselves. Yeah, because like that's the thing. So just for the first, and this also kind of goes to the question here, which is what were the NOPHEK based on? So just for people who are like, I have never heard of this before. I know that. So like years ago when I first encountered Essa was getting this book published. I'm like, that's so cool. What a great name for a spaceship. This is not the name of the when I started reading, I'm like, oh, that's what those words mean. So this is a creature, and this is something that they kind of, for lack of a better term, grow, excrete. Well, I mean, it's not, it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, but you can probably spoil a tiny bit of the beginning. So there's this creature. Yeah, it's the first book, and it happens in the first like handful of chapters. So there's a creature that's being raised, and within its brain crystallizes this like matter that is very, very, very valuable, very high energy potential. The most valuable, the gloss is the most valuable resource in the multiverse, and then these creatures grow it in their bodies. So obviously they're very valuable if you could farm them, but they can only exist in a very, very, very specific universe parameters. So within this giant bubble multiverse structure, like where you could run such an operation is very limited. And then there's all the logistics, like how to move things from here and there, and how you get them
Mhm.
there, and how you feed them, and how you like. It becomes very complicated when you
Yep.
can't just freely travel in one plane of existence that's
Nope.
like very predictable, and everything works as expected all the time. Um, so this isolated little operation is extremely precious because of how complicated it is to pull off.
Yeah, and so you've got this guy Caden who has no idea that he's actually part of this larger operation
Yeah.
that's run by this other organization. And when he gets out and finds out kind of the horrors of what's been going on, he's kind of single-minded. All right, now I have kind of a target for what's happened because again, it's a spoiler at the very beginning of the book that his people go through an atrocity. And
Hmm.
so understandably, he's not okay with that for some reason, like having everybody and everyone and his entire way of life basically just erased to find
Yeah.
out, oh, yeah, I guess we were just part of something much bigger and no one really cares. And some of
Hmm.
the technology you introduce, I love it because it's not just about, oh, look at this cool thing I can do, but how it advances character development and the interactions of the plot. So there are these abilities to like record people's memories and show what somebody's been through and show all this. And then the way that you do things like weaponize memory, not just in that context, but later on as things go on and how those are used. Like, I mean, my memory kind of usually just is weaponized against myself. Like, where
Yeah,
are my
same.
keys? I don't know. And then of course the whole, hey, let's replay every stupid thing I've ever done and torture yourself at night. But hey,
Every night.
now someone else can do that for you and to you. Isn't that great?
Yeah, write what you know.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, you're like, this was from my therapy notes, and this is
Yeah.
what they did. No, just
Well, like value and relative value was always a huge theme in the first book. So
kidding.
like part of Caden realizing like where he came from and the role he played, and that he was like his value compared to these like his value as a little cog in this big
Yeah.
machine, like compared to this like animal was so
Hmm.
low. So
He's
like
like,
he's yeah, it's not like the protagonist's parents are killed and oh no, that's sad and now he wants revenge. It's like no, you lost your entire worldview was false. Your idea of
mhm.
who you are and your identity and your value in like your community, it was false. Like your language, like the words that you've been given to explain how you like relate to the world, that was like
Mhm.
false and curated. So it really gets
Yeah.
kind of
It's knocked just
bulldoze,
right
yeah,
out.
just right down, start from
Yeah.
scratch, while also being inundated with overload of, just the bigness of the world, and
Mhm.
the sense of injustice is so crushing. And he's got PTSD, and like he has to kind of narrow it down to like he
Who can
to
I go
move
after for
yeah,
this?
to move forward, he has to do something, and he latches on to this one like I need to make a difference. Like I need to have value. I need to make a difference. There has to be something that I can do. So yeah, his memories have value. His evidence of this operation has value. And again, what will he exchange? Like what will he get in exchange? Like there has to be something that's valuable to him for his goal. So it's like this layers upon layers of different people's valuations from different perspectives.
And even
Yeah,
that
for the book.
changes. And I mean, I do love how some of the things that he once saw as value and then saw as like, this isn't a sign that I have value. This is a sign that I'm just property. And then later
Hmm.
reclaiming it as a sign of this is who I am and this is where I came from. And I'm not going to make this a total loss.
Yeah,
Um,
you can rewrite those things.
yeah.
The narrative.
And even the relationships between, okay, myself and this larger system, or even myself and this creature that I see as this horrible thing and a source of trauma. And then later, maybe not so much. And so the question is, what were the NOPHEK based on? And I will tell you, I kept changing what it was in my head from all the fantasy movies I've seen. Like it's been the Gmork from Never Ending Story. It's been those pig dog things from the original Willow movie, because those are pretty terrifying. But then when I was getting a sense of scale and people like sitting on it, I'm going, oh, his shoulders are as tall as his shoulder, and he's a full grown man. This thing's huge. So it's like bigger, like dire wolf big, but not really a
Yeah,
dog, but
well,
like
he
a boxy
grows.
head. So I'm picturing like a pit bull head because they got really boxy, big old heads. But
Yeah.
then like webbed toes. Like, have you paid somebody to draw this thing out and make one for you and then make it animatronic so it can come next to it like because that would be amazing.
I haven't yet, but I would like more fan art to get different interpretations. But
See,
like, so in the very beginning, like it's a traumatic experience with them, and it's very fast. So it's like an action scene, and
Mhm.
so even in his memory of it, like in that sort of situation, your senses aren't are incomplete. So it's like you
Mhm.
get flashes of this and that. And there's never like we're not going to stop and observe the creature and get
Yeah.
a full description of it, right? And then that's it. So throughout the book, there's kind of like it's a very incomplete idea of what these NOPHEK are, and like a lot of his associations with it are like teeth and blood and tearing and like the violence of them more than like a full picture of the creature until the very end when he's grown through that enough to be able to actually get away from himself and have a perspective to look at it as its own being with its own
That it didn't ask to be
agency.
there and it didn't
Yeah,
ask to be
it
farmed
was
for the thing it grows in its head, kind of
exactly like
like
him.
an
Yeah, like
oyster, but in its head, because
hmm
you open the shell and its head
yeah.
is a shell, so that's not good for it if
No.
that happens. The
Yeah,
NoFX aren't like, yeah, we really like that.
he's got to
Okay.
dissociate himself from them to be able to see them in full.
Okay, so love the concept of scaling out things. NoFX in my mind are like a French bulldog, scary and huge and huggable when they want. I have two
Yeah.
French bulldogs, not in my house, but my father and his wife, so my stepmother, have these Frenchies, and I mean their toes aren't quite
Mm.
webbed, but I can imagine. Now I'm just picturing giant Colette running around
Well,
as maybe that's what she stands for, is Colette, a French
yeah,
bulldog. But I love that. But the idea, and he says it's a
yeah.
testament to the pros that you go from hating the NoPEC to actually loving them, and I completely agree.
And I had like I'm not the kind of author that has the full ending like in mind ahead of time. Like the last third of my books is always kind of vague in my head, and I've come to
Oh,
accept
the way
that.
to hear.
Yeah, but I did have there's like I won't spoil anything, but there's a final scene in a location that's similar to earlier in the book. So like the Caden's final scene is like a bookend kind of echo of the beginning, but with everything reversed. Um, which I had always had in my head of like this is where I want to get I want to get the reader him and the reader to that point.
Well, it's like the full circle, and then I see that. And so, okay, so you mentioned earlier you have some inspirational things next to you, but obviously you don't have like, hey, it's exactly this actor and exactly this animal, because none of that applies for pretty much
hmm
anything. Like some of the main characters, like Caden and Thray, is that how we say his name?
hmm
I never got a picture of Caden that I could easily cast, but I had one for Thray that's probably wrong, but mostly it's as much the dark hair and the swagger that I'm just like, when Loki is
uh-huh.
done rapping, if Tom Hiddleston is not busy, if he would like to come over and cause trouble in another multiverse, I'm just saying
hmm
he would
That's
be
a good
my pick.
one.
Would you have a different pick? Is there somebody you would be like, no, I picture
So
him more like this?
I don't really do the fan casting in my
Mhm.
head. I don't know why, but
Maybe because half your cast is not human, so you'd have a
yeah,
lot of
I
trouble. You're like,
guess.
I don't know what to do with you. You just keep shifting around, and
Right.
these. I mean, I don't want to spoil for people who are still reading the first book, but there are concepts you introduce in the second book, and I kind of was making a little light of it in some of my posts about Be There Live or other ways too. That you've got characters who are in multiple vessels, for lack of a better term,
Mhm.
and so you would have to cast like 17 people, and some of them are definitely. I mean, I think most of them are at least bipedal, but some of them don't have their feet on the floor all the time, so that would make
Yeah.
it harder too. So honestly, if you
Yeah.
get an anime
Just
offer, that might be best, just to
yeah,
have
I think
all
that'd
of
be
that.
easiest just to animate it.
Everybody's
Yeah.
animated. Everybody gets really big hair, which is really cool because anime, everyone gets really giant hair. Okay, so when you're doing your writing, you said you have that as your inspo, and then you said you don't have so are you not a plotter? Are you a pantser, Asa?
So when I drafted the first book and I was more of a discovery writer
Yes.
because I didn't have deadlines. I could do I could go as slow as I wanted. I could set it aside for a while. I could kind of find my way. I could get in the weeds. I could, you know, figure it out. And
Mhm.
so for discovery, my earlier books were all discovery written. Like I had tentpole kind of scenes that I was excited to get to, but
Oh, I
how
love that term, tentpole
yeah,
scene. Like we're going
yeah.
there.
Like
I
had
don't
in
know
my
how
head
we're
a
getting there, but we're that
yeah.
way.
I have a vision of like this happens. How does
Mhm.
like what the hell is up with that? Like how do we get there? So writing to that was very fun, but I think I need like the space and the ease for my brain to be able to flow that way.
Yeah.
So the first book was mostly discovery written, and then I went through revisions with my agent, and they had really good feedback. And then once the book was acquired, uh, more revisions, but deadlines.
Deadlines.
Yeah, so I realized
Hmm.
I'm gonna have to get extremely good at plotting, and like I need to know what I'm doing in order to get there on time every time.
So instead of
And
a tent pole, it's more of a cattle prod zapping you forward or hitting that
yeah,
deadline. Yeah.
yeah. And so the next two books were also heavily outlined, and I had to figure out where I was going. But I sold this book as, the phrase is, a standalone with serious potential.
Ah, you always told that. Anybody who's ever queried knows that, and you could
Yeah.
figure, you could literally have someone standing on the edge of a chasm looking down like this close to falling. You're like, but I mean, this could be the ending. It's like, no, that can't be the ending, but it's just standalone with serious
Yeah.
potential. Like any reader would allow it to end there and not just
Mhm.
fly it and go, come on.
Well, and I think readers can feel that in how the trilogy turned out. So, like,
Mhm.
standalone with serious potential means that you're not sure if the book's going to get acquired or not. So, it doesn't make sense to spend effort planning and or writing subsequent books if it's never going to sell and they're never going to see the light of day. So, you write one that has the
Interesting.
potential to be a series, and it's kind of stands on its own if the publisher just wants to buy the
The one.
one. Yeah. So you get that out on submission, and then you start
Mhm.
working on something else, which is great and very efficient. But if
And you
that
have
book
to come
sells,
back.
then all of a sudden you need two or more
Two
books
more.
that you
They're like,
have in
we
the
bought the
can.
multi-pack. And you're like, I don't have the multi-pack.
Yeah.
That's not never here. And that's the other thing is when you are writing in series, even if you're fairly confident they will want another book, you might have some significant editorial feedback in the first book that would change the trajectory of where you would go. So you're
Absolutely.
like, I'm doing this with that character, and they're like, we really need you to kill that character off in book one. You're like, well, I can't. They can't be a
Yeah.
POV character if I've killed them off now, can they? Or
Absolutely.
you wanted to kill somebody off, and they're like, no, we think they should be the next POV character. So you're gonna have to write them into every scene that they don't exist in. Like, oh,
Yeah. So
that changes things.
it was a lot of planning and plotting on the fly because like I had to meet my deadlines, but also I didn't really have a plan ahead of time. So it all had to happen. I love that there's a gif of like from Wallace and Gromit of Gromit like setting the train tracks while riding on the train going like trying to make turns and everything. Like that's how it felt to write
Well,
the next two books.
you still nailed it. And again, like these Nat and Tim finally comes out, and
Yeah.
then other times like the books just come out really quickly and they didn't give you time to breathe. You're like,
Yeah.
come up for air sometime, please.
And not planning was good and bad, and I wasn't really expecting the good ways. Hopefully they're good. But like like I wrote the first book and it underwent a lot of revisions during our structural edits. And like
Mhm.
you were saying, it kind of changes what can happen in the next book. So I'm like starting to plan the sequel, and you're like I'm looking at these pieces that I left myself with and like
Mhm.
the world
Now
mechanics
look
that I
at this.
designed, and there's like it started to narrow down like what was actually possible to do with the plot and the characters and like where things could go. And then by book 3, it was very much like, okay, I have these I have these threads that are going here, and
Yeah.
there's like you can't take it completely in another direction. Like
No.
there's very set the mechanics were rigid enough, and like the characters were already on their route, and like third book in like there's it kind of has to go a certain way.
Yeah, I feel like you definitely set it up. And I would say even from the first book that
Mhm.
again, I'm going to be speaking for people who've read it, they'll know what I mean. If people who haven't, they're like, what are you talking about? But I swear this makes sense that you are setting things up even in the first book in certain character interactions and their stated goals that aren't going to come to fruition until later books, but you see them as they develop towards those things, and people might
Mhm.
take certain, left turns here and there, or reevaluate their goals or their motives, or like, is this really what I want? And am I wanting it for the right reasons? But you set that up even from the first book,
Yeah.
including like, this guy's the big bad. No, wait, this is the big bad. No, maybe this is the big bad. Wait, is there a big bad? Hold on. I think existence might be the big bad.
Everyone's
Hold on.
morals are gray.
Exactly. Well, and I
Yeah.
love that though, because again, without spoiling anything, you have characters shifting allegiances and even getting into the idea of where those allegiances come from. And I don't think it's a huge spoiler to say that certain characters have this ability to influence others, and how they use it and what their opinion about it when they use it and their willingness to use it changes things too. And getting back to the whole idea of agency and free choice, and whether they're giving those choices to others. And like that first chapter in that third book, the idea of giving a civilization a choice, and all of that is just like the same concepts and the same themes explored, but writ larger and with higher stakes and higher concepts and
with points of view that conflict with each other, like or parallel each other. So either everyone's dealing like the 4 points of view are all closely tied together and influence each other, and they're dealing with the same situation, but their perspective on it is different enough, and like the values they're bringing to it, the quandaries that they're dealing with are all different. So they kind of hopefully counterpoint each other in interesting ways.
Well, I felt that the expansion from the single point of view and then the dual point of view to then the 4 POV really helped, including characters that you maybe only saw. I kind of, again, not spoiling it, but for Game of Thrones fans, it's almost like, hey, we're now getting POV of like Jaime Lannister. Like, wait a second, you were a bad guy. I am not supposed to like you, caring for you. I'm very confused about how I feel about myself right now. And all that, because you're seeing the shades and what they struggled through and what their upbringing was like. And you deal with things like memory and time and flashbacks in ways to incorporate those things so the reader gets a more full perception of them. And even then seeing them in relationships with others rather than just like, that's the bad guy.
I like to humanize them. I like to get in their head and like challenge the reader a bit to enter a different perspective, and also think about the dilemmas they're facing. Like, what would you do? Like, which way would you pick? Like, how would you deal with this impossible situation?
Exactly, because you can see the beauty, and it's not like there's ever one where you go, well, obviously this person's wrong and they should be stopped.
Like, you're right about that, but you're wrong about this.
Yes.
Or like your goal is right, but your means are wrong, or your means are bad, but your goal is righteous. Like the complexities there.
Well, and even when the goals are righteous on both sides, it's really about weighing competing moral views that can't both coexist. And it's like, well, which one is the higher value, this or this? And there's an argument to be made on both sides, which makes it really hard, because then you're like, okay, part of you is like, well, I always have to cheer for this guy because I've been invested with him since the beginning. But then when it's like, well, wait a second, what are you doing? I don't know if you should be taking that. Is that such a good idea? I don't know what's going to happen if you do that. Maybe you probably shouldn't. And then even things as simple as watching people as they reposition through the books and reposition alliances, and watching their pets go back and forth is like, where's the Whipkin now? I know. And someone I had posted that we were going to be having this chat, and it's like, well, which is your favorite book? And the answer should be all, but you can have a favorite Zenid. And somebody else also asked about their favorite food, and some of the food descriptions. I will admit that one of the things that stuck in my mind wasn't a food description about food, but saying you at some point described a vanilla scent of birds. And I'm like, Essa, what bird smells like vanilla? Where did you get that from?
Well, I'm a licensed falconer. Although I don't have a bird now, and I haven't had a raptor for some years because I've been too busy with everything.
They're probably I have a lot of high maintenance having birds of prey just hanging around.
They are. It's not a hobby that you can like put aside in any way. They're very high maintenance.
Can anybody watch my falcon for a couple weeks so I'm busy?
Yeah.
No one's they don't have the glove and ready to just hold one. No.
Yeah, only another falconer, which is like a whole
that's a whole thing.
Network. Yeah, that's a whole thing. But they have a sense that's extremely hard to describe, and different like species have different scents. Yeah.
See, and years ago, and I have like the tiniest biology background. I love it, but I really don't know what I'm doing most of the time. But years ago, I was in Brazil and I was studying peccaries, and they smell like olives. And like the idea that you can smell them, they smell like olives, and they're really strong. And you go to the zoo sometimes or other places where there's a lot of animals, and it's like the gorillas do not smell good. The gorillas smell like teenage boys is what they smell like, because that's what it is. It's a bunch of teenage boys in there. But the peccary smelled like olives. And so when I read that, I'm like, I've never noticed any birds that smell. Now I want to go around to bird enclosures and see. Except last time we were in Santa Barbara over the summer, and all I remember smelling was the penguins, and they are not pleasant. They do not smell like vanilla. I'm just telling you that now. Maybe falcons do, but penguins do not smell anything pleasant. Like they smell like awful fish and other stuff. But I mean, I don't know. You had some other scents mentioned throughout, and even just the idea of because you talk a little bit about having some neurodiversity in there and how sense overload is a thing and how being able to retreat out of your body or what your comfort person is and all that. And I refer to myself as holistic, but probably neurodiverse. I don't know where I fall in that. Like I failed the online ADOS. They're like, you are not autistic. I'm like, I don't know if I'm anything. I'm just kind of all over the place. But I have kids on the spectrum in terms of knowing enough of that stuff to know the sense overload and all of that and being like, yeah, I'm sure if I could take her out of her body, she wouldn't be mad at her socks anymore. That is not an option. We'll have to figure out how to make the socks work today. Sorry, kid.
Yeah, there's definitely a character with the wish fulfillment of like, can I just leave somewhere nicer for a little while?
Yeah. Like, because this is bothering me and my hair is bothering me and everything. And
and
the world is loud.
Body and embodiment is a big theme even from like the first book. Like he undergoes, not to spoil like that plot point, but he undergoes a lot of change.
You see what I said? He kind of, for
he matures.
He goes to that episode of the Brady Bunch where Peter Brady's voice changes.
And there's a lot. And even like where he came from and what his genetics are and what that means. And like, there's a lot of struggle with body for all of the characters. And all the way up to what's the end. We won't spoil anything.
Well, I won't spoil. I can talk about it
I think that theme escalates as well.
Well, yeah. I mean, like, again, not going to spoil, but things that it's like people who, when bodies are failing, and then what do we do to fix them? And the idea of body and spirit, and you make that a very visceral thing where I will say, this is one of the things. So I'm going to beat up your publisher because the gray pages have like, okay, that's the next book, which makes sense. Just FYI for folks, the glossary is before the gray pages. And I wish it would have said in the beginning, hey, there's a glossary and it's before the gray pages, because I so would have loved that glossary earlier. I didn't even know it was there.
It's on my website as well, and I've tried to yell online that it exists.
There's
a glossary in every book, and there's also AZURA GHOST and ETHERA GRAVE have on my website are like summaries of the previous books. If you need to get caught up, like
previously on.
Yeah,
I know that.
Next time I will ask for that to be something like that put in the beginning in the front matter, because I know that helps a lot of readers.
Or even if they had like, because they're the gray pages, like I know for me, I'm like, there's gray, okay, and then it starts with like meet the author and extras. So I understand, because I guess they figured the glossary isn't an extra, it's part of this book, but I didn't see it till I was done with it, and I'm like, I know. It's like, you mean there was a study guide this whole time? And some of them like, it's like, OMG, the glossary. Okay, Shelly, you can go smell your canary. We would like to know what your canary smells like.
Oh, yes, Shelly.
I don't know what canaries smell like. I mean, we have my middle daughter. She keeps taking donuts that she doesn't plan to eat in order to feed them to the crows outside. So if anything, the crows around here smell like donuts, because my kid keeps taking donuts and giving them to Mr. Glaze, who she thinks delivers them to other. Like, seriously, I'm like, I don't think it's sharing. Like, she thinks it has like a donut business, and I don't really know who got that. Okay. And it probably smells like just powdered sugar, or maybe mochi donuts, because that's what she's been getting to. But it describes certain words, but I would say that some of the better descriptions come, just in the books themselves. And one of them that I was like, in the first book, my brain was like, I don't know how to really understand this. And in the second book, it got it so clear. I'm like, can I tattoo that one back to the beginning of the first book? And it's the word luminiferity, which you have invented like your whole other language here. And I don't mean like the Xenid stuff. I just mean other words that they use in here. I mean, pretty much every word of all of these, except for the word ghost, are all words that you either, I can't hold it. There we go. Made up or using it a different term. Because we're not talking about like grave as in like, it's in a hole and we bury it 6 feet under. I mean, sometimes that might be relevant too, but that you mentioned engraved, like engraven and things like that, which, linguistics, I never even put it together that engraved and a grave are the same. And I guess it probably means to cut into something or dig down. I don't know.
Yeah, I love that stuff. The layers and layers of meaning, and you're like,
you handle
nudging
it
and
so
different.
beautifully. But the words
Just,
make sense in the
mhm.
terms, so like you figure it out. But there's like a really simplistic explanation of what luminiferity is in this one. I'm like,
Mhm.
thank you. I'm going to go back and insert it in the first book too. So I'm like, oh yes, I get it now. But this
Yeah.
idea of like this space, like what is your definition of what the luminiferity is?
Oh my gosh.
You can read from the
Um,
glossary if you need to.
I can't remember what I wrote in the glossary. So basically, there's a physical plane, and then there's sort of another dimension of like they're not separate, but of
No, it's like a spiritual
energy,
place.
potential,
Yeah.
information, like
Mhm.
all kind of blended together, not crystallized, not spatially appropriated.
Just like
And there's sort of
here.
in a mechanical sense, there's like a veil between them, almost like if you imagine it's underwater and above water. And you see if light's shining through the surface, you get the patterns on the seafloor, say
Yeah.
the ocean floor. And then the more turbulent that membrane is between water and air, that changes the patterns underneath. So, like, the patterns are physical reality and like how the material world works. And then that membrane is influenced by concentration and thought and intent and consciousness and all this kind of that can be for some of the powerful characters can be
Yes.
a very like tangible
Mhm.
instructional force, and then for others it's sort of going about every day and don't even notice
They
that
don't
they're
even think about
influencing,
it.
don't even think about it.
Yeah.
um but very like very clear um intent can change the
Mhm.
relationship between energy and how things manifest in a material sense, and in a sensory way.
Well,
So
I
that
I loved how you managed that. And in the first book, I came to an understanding of it, and the second one was like, oh, that's so clear in how people are using it. And it's like, oh yeah, she's able to do this, and then this person's over here doing that, and going back and forth through
and
that,
it's such
and being
a
able to do that.
Yeah, it's such a and I found myself more and more just leaning on like trying to be really plain and sensory, and even though it doesn't really work like physical with the language,
But it
physical and
makes
sensory, even
sense.
yeah, it's something that we can relate to, even though I'm just trying to describe a world that's like divest from time and
Yeah. They're
and
like, it's
matter
a
and
sphere and it has none
senses.
of this because there's nothing material about it. Like it's basically the
Yeah,
anti-material realm, but the things that animate us and who we are and our spirit and
yeah.
pulling people in from that. And if they're still in there, even if they
Hmm.
maybe aren't with us now, or they're having some kind of idea of them being changed from, well,
Hmm.
maybe they're dead, so that could be a problem.
Yeah.
But death is always an inconvenience for everybody, honestly. Sometimes no one really likes that.
But
Um,
I think we could, the readers can connect to these things through like we need senses of motion, we need texture,
mhm.
we need sensory, we need like some meat to kind of guide us through what is actually going on in dimensions that maybe don't have any of those aspects. Um, but and I initially had more like scientific language in there because it is based like I love quantum mechanics and
Yes.
like, really hardcore physics,
And then
and
your
so
editor said, "No one understands this essay. We're
exactly.
gonna have to give it back to them." Well, and that's
Exactly.
always the balance because especially I would absolutely, and I think I'm pretty sure I did on my Goodreads. I'll double check, but put this is hard sci-fi, and there, I mean, it in some ways it also qualifies as science fantasy because there is so much of that energy, and whenever you're getting into energy that we can't actually quantify, it becomes kind of fantasy. Um,
Yeah, and
but
everything's
there are those physics aspects that I'm like, of course, it's hard sci-fi. Just don't make me
yeah,
take a test on it.
yeah, it's all drawn from, like, scientific concepts and, physics and quantum mechanics and all that, but I have to illustrate it in, like, more of a fantastical way
Yep.
in order for it to feel palpable. Because these are, like,
Like, how do you do
it's
that
big
otherwise? You're like, "How do you-"
equations, yeah, it's not accessible, and I found that when I did try to, like, sneak in words that were accurate or that a
You're like,
physicist might
"No,
understand, I just lost it ungrounds the reader immersion.
didn't like
Even characters that are like
more
that,
sciencey."
yeah, sciencey and like
Mhm.
are in like that's how they would talk about it.
Right.
It still didn't work for them to like wax on about
Like,
just
"Sir, you're not allowed." Well,
mechanics
and
of the metaphysical dimensions.
I can think of one specifically who probably would wanna talk that
Hmm.
way.
I kept a few of her like
Like, "You're allowed to talk about like that."
yeah. Go
But
on.
then otherwise you've got to come back. And you
Yeah.
over here, we're gonna have you talk
We're
this.
gonna lose the reader.
But you definitely, I mean, your dialogue, I would say that as well, that you had a distinctive sense of voice. And I don't just mean within the POV characters, but you have different ones. And one of them, again, I don't think it's a spoiler to say they have a parasite infecting how they speak. And then you've got some who they're all speaking English. So you don't need to have like your Klingon dictionary out here to understand any of this, but some of them have like little terms and phrases that are pulled
Sneak
from
in
their
there.
own languages. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, a little bit of
Sample
pigeon in
defense.
there.
Yeah, and then some of them just their cheekiness, like N is just cheeky and poking people with like, I see what you're doing. It's like, N, get out of the room. We're trying to have an adult conversation. What are you doing?
Even like Ksenia and Panka on the main crew, I had these little rules that I think the reader can feel, even if it's not obvious. Like one of them always uses contractions whenever possible, like contracts all.
Yeah,
the
Panka's
English
very,
word.
very like,
Yeah,
she's casual. She's not pretty cool most
Panka's
time.
always kind of, and it has a rhythm to it. And I'm always trying to put in those contractions. And then Ksenia drops articles whenever possible, like a and the, and it makes like a different feeling. So in lieu of like creating alien languages or saying that they're speaking an alien language, but
For which I thank you.
translator, yeah, you can kind of, there's these little tricks to make it feel a little more alien while still keeping it English and grounded. Because that was one of the tricky parts with the whole trilogy, was like I wanted it to feel alien and bringing all these kind of concepts that were strange and be as
But
weird
not
as
so
possible.
alien that it's
Yeah,
off-putting and that people can't
you don't want to
relate. Yeah.
lose. You have to have enough
Yeah.
things that are relatable, or to construe something in a relatable way so that the reader stays grounded while you're like, look at this weird stuff. Like,
Okay, so we're getting a request for how to pronounce. Well, you wrote X and A. So I don't know if you maybe listen to it, because it's KSIN with the tilde, which I can't do on my keyboard without like special
NY.
Yeah, and well, it's also confusing because if you were looking, sometimes the full name is Cassinet, and then you drop the A's for the diminutive. First moment, I'm like, wait a second, did I get that? Oh no, that's just a shortened version. I got it now. Just like Endurian goes down to N and everything like that. Like everybody gets nicknames. I mean, not everybody.
The Endavians
Some
have
get called
whole...
Treasure, which is cute. But yeah, so pronounce that for us, for everybody who's reading at home and going, how should this sound in my head?
So I say Cassigne. Yeah, so it's like Cassigne, kind of, but said fast.
Yeah, that's what I figured too. You put those two letters together, and I'm all right. You give me Welsh, and I give up. Even though my little kid Welsh, it's like one of the few phonetic ones where there's enough vowels and consonants, and not just like that's just a bunch of consonants. What am I supposed to do with that? I give up.
I love languages, and I'm good at languages, but when the written form doesn't relate closely enough to how it's spoken, that really trips up my brain.
It can be a hard thing for me too. And I know one of the hardest things for me, just the frustrating, like, I didn't plan this well, is when I was in Brazil, I had been speaking Spanish for years, and everybody there speaks Portuguese, and that doesn't really, they're not the same. And you'd look at it, and in my brain, I go, that looks like Spanish. I can read it. And then I hear it, I'm like, y'all are speaking French, because it sounds to me more like French, and I can't do anything with French. I mean, I still have like the cast list for Les Mis, and I can't even pronounce the full title for Les Mis, which is why I just call it Les Mis, because otherwise I just want the Spanish pronunciation, and it's completely wrong. Completely wrong. I mean, and it helps when you can go, all right, I think everything in yours seemed like it would have a phonetic pronunciation.
And I have, the glossary in the books does not have it, but the glossary on my website has a little pronunciation, like just in kind of as plain as I can try to describe an English speaker how it should sound.
Well, and your website is scrolling below. So if anybody's listening to it, it's literally just Essa's name, essahansen.com. But yeah, it's scrolling below, so you'll be able to do that. And on the links on the page should have a click, so you can just go right there and see that. And you've got the books there. And I know we talked a little bit before we got going as far as like, okay, so the trilogy is wrapped. Are you writing something now? And is it also spacey?
So the trilogy started veering off in like the science fantasy kind of direction.
It went off into the luminiferity, and it never came back. That's fine.
It didn't come back. Well, my brain didn't come back, because the next one is also kind of science fantasy. In like, I guess in the vein of like Final Fantasy, where it's like there's tech and nature and not magic per se, but weirdness, like spiritual.
I like weirdness.
Yeah, weird, spiritual, surreal. surreal stuff. There's shape-shifting species again, and memory palace,
Ooh.
and yeah, it's gonna be
See
really
Memory Palace, and I think Superman. I'm going. I want my Fortress of Solitude. Memory Palace. My Memory Palace, or what? Sherlock has a Memory Palace or something like that too, doesn't he?
Sherlock does, Hannibal does, but there's not a whole lot in fiction.
We should have more
We
Memory
should have,
Palaces.
we should have more.
Mostly just so I know where I put my keys. I honestly am like, I don't know where they are.
I will put that joke in the book for you somewhere.
I appreciate that. Like, it's an Easter egg fan service right there. But Essa, we've been on for almost an hour. I can't believe that it's like gone. It's just flown by. It's just wandered off because we went into maybe AZURA was taking us along.
Fantastic tangents.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, this is the name of a ship. We'll just AZURA ship. I won't spoil which this one is. I realized when I'm like, okay, I get that, but then we're missing one kind of, but there's not a fourth. I'm like, there's no book here that starts with a V. I could see what we could do with that one. And then, but Essa, you are amazing. Your books are amazing. There is a glossary for people who are like, I need help. You can make your own flashcards and study, but there's never a test. And the way the writing will follow along, you'll be able to keep following even if you don't turn back to the glossary. So I appreciate that. I hope we can get you a new vanilla scented falcon soon at some point when your lifestyle allows. I mean, not at the expense of you not doing all the amazing work, because girl here. Thank you so much. Join us next month. I think I have Finley Turner coming on. That's like kind of romance, kind of there might be murder. I don't remember. We're gonna have to figure out what's going with that. You can always find us on the Vox Vomitus channel. So if you're not subscribed, please do on YouTube, and you can find all the episodes of To the Moon Allison and Vox Vomitus. That, they don't let me do nearly enough sci-fi over there because Jennifer gets confused. I didn't say that. Thank you so much, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you, Allison, and everyone.
Thanks, Essa.